Okay, this is Federalist 28, Part 3. Alexander Hamilton is, in this paper, actually very bluntly, very clearly says that if the state governments get out of hand, want to take away your freedoms, the federal government can help stop that. If the federal government gets out of hand and its army gets out of hand, then the state governments can help stop it. So he actually says that, just like the Declaration of Independence said if any of them get out of hand, it's your right to stand up, rise up, and start a rebellion and overthrow the government. That's what he's echoing. So let me continue reading. I'll start with the paragraph that starts with the obstacles to usurpation and the facilities of resistance increase with the increased extent of the state, provided the citizens understand their rights and are disposed to defend them. The natural strength of the people in a large community, in proportion to the artificial strength of the government, is greater than in a small, and of course more competent to struggle with the attempts of the government to establish a tyranny. But in a confederacy, the people, without exaggerations, may be said to be entirely the masters of their own fate. Power being almost always the rival of power, the general government will at all times, general government means the federal government, will at all times stand ready to check the usurpations of the state governments. And these will have the same disposition towards the general government. In other words, state governments will check that the federal government doesn't go too far, and the federal government will check that the state governments don't go too far. The people, by throwing themselves into either scale, will infallibly make it preponderant. If their rights are invaded by either, they can make use of the other as the instrument of redress. How wise will it be in them, by cherishing the union, to preserve to themselves an advantage which can never be too highly prized. So he's actually, like I said, he's echoing what the Declaration of Independence says. He says we have the right to stand up, rise up, and put down a government. If it's the federal government, state governments can oppose it. If it's the state governments, federal government can help people oppose it. It may safely be received as an axiom in our political system. Oh, before I read this, let me show you this again. Remember, I talked about Pennsylvania, the northern part of Pennsylvania here, and this is the state of Connecticut right here, okay? And Connecticut claimed that the northern part of Pennsylvania, which was Wyoming area, Wyoming territory, not the Wyoming state, belonged to Connecticut. That's why he said at the beginning of this paper again that they could have gone to war against one another. And look up here, this is the state of New York, and this little area here is now state of Vermont. It actually became a state in 1791. But back then, the people that had settled here, they wanted to separate from New York. They said that we are not part of New York. So he's talking about that too. The same thing in western part of Massachusetts. This is Massachusetts. That's the western part of Massachusetts. The Shays' Rebellion had happened. So he says we can't be naive enough to think that we don't need a professional force in times of rebellion and insurrection to stand up to it. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back and read this. It may safely be received as an axiom in our political system that the state governments will, in all possible contingencies, afford complete security against the invasions of the public liberty by the national authority. Projects of usurpation cannot be masked under pretenses so likely to escape the penetration of select bodies of men as of the people at large. The legislatures will have better means of information. They can discover the danger at a distance. So your legislatures, the state legislatures, will sooner than you know that the federal government is going to do something wrong, and they'll keep you advised. So he says again and again, he keeps on saying, if the state wants to violate your rights, federal government can help you. If the federal government wants to violate your rights, state governments can help you. So you will have the best of both worlds this way. When we unite, we will have double security against either one of these. They can discover the danger at a distance, and possessing all the organs of civil power and the confidence of the people, they can at once adopt a regular plan of opposition in which they can combine all the resources of the community. They can readily communicate with each other in the different states and unite their common forces for the protection of their common liberty. The great extent of the country is a further security. We have already experienced its utility against the attacks of a foreign power. Here's another, again, he says, why a larger union with several states would be better. He says, when the British invaded us during the Revolutionary War, the fact that we had a large country, that helped us, because when they came here to Manhattan Island and Washington was pushed back, if it wasn't a large place, Washington could not have retreated out of there, and that saved the American forces. So he says this is another good thing that we have to consider. When the country is a large area, when we unite 13 states, if the federal government gets out of hand and wants to do something wrong in one state, then the other states will be aware of it and can stand up to it. And the fact that because the country is so large, the federal government, the federal forces cannot be in all places. So this will be to the advantage of us if the federal government becomes a usurper. And it would have precisely the same effect against the enterprises of ambitious rulers in the national councils. If the federal army should be able to quell the resistance of one state, the distant states would be able to make head with fresh forces. The advantages obtained in one place must be abandoned to subdue the opposition in others. And the moment the part which had been reduced to submission was left to itself, its efforts would be renewed and its resistance revived. We should recollect that the extent of the military force must at all events be regulated by the resources of the country. For a long time to come, it will not be possible to maintain a large army. So he says, again, for people who are scared of a large professional force, a large standing army, he says we can't have that because we don't have the resources, we don't have the money for it right now. And as the means of doing this increase, the population and natural strength of the community will proportionably increase. When will the time arrive that the federal government can rise and maintain an army capable of erecting a despotism over the great body of the people of an immense empire? Again, empire being a large country, who are in a situation through the medium of their state governments to take measures for their own defense with all the celerity, regularity, and system of independent nations. The apprehensions may be considered as a disease for which there can be found no cure in the resources of argument and reasoning. So again, a union would be the best thing for us. Unite the 13 states. This way, we can have a small professional force instead of 13 professional militaries. We can be united and use our resources to make our people's lives better rather than use them to buy military guns and military stuff so that we can become enemies and weaken ourselves and then fall prey to the European forces. Become weak so that European forces can take advantage of our weakness and divide us.